ethical teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe have as much relevance today as they ever have. The values upon which the movement is based, wisdom and reverence, are not just desirable, they're necessary for the very survival of civilization. Now we shall proclaim this day, Education Day. And please give my warmest regards to the Rebbe on this, his 86th birthday. Thank you very much.
The Rebbe sends his regards to you, Mr. President, and he expresses his wishes, as he always did, that you should be able to carry out the extraordinary role that the Almighty has assigned to you, as you have until now, with health and happiness, together with the First Lady for many years to come. In whatever position you'll be filling, we all look forward to you to continue the great work, historical work that you have started on behalf of education, specifically by returning the traditional values which have been the bedrock of civilization ever since beginning. And these are the 7 Noahide laws contained and given by Moses, as it is reflected here in this scroll.
By proclaiming the racist Rebbe's birthday Education Day, and not only honoring Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, but declaring that the Noahide laws are the foundational basis of America, Reagan violated the separation of church and state clause of the Constitution and bowed to Schneerson as if the Messiah. The 7 Noahide laws, which Red Ronnie Reagan dutifully signed off on, compel the beheading of all Christians, Hindus, and other so-called idolaters. Reagan signed the Talmudic death warrant for the Christian Zionist evangelicals who elected him. The Kabbalistic Lubavitcher Rebbe famously proclaimed that the Jews alone have holy souls, while the souls of the Gentiles derive from 3 satanic spheres and are entirely evil. Reagan praised a racist Jewish supremacist.
We represent the great spiritual leader of the day, Rabbi Schneerson, bringing you the message of support in your great endeavors and efforts in behalf of freedom. You have chosen the menorah in mentioning it twice as a symbol of freedom. Unfortunately, too many people speak of freedom of religion, and when they speak of freedom of religion, they refer to freedom from religion rather than freedom of religion. Hanukkah spells the victory of spirituality over the secularization of society as was represented by the Hellenists. And this depicts the activities. The President set the tone, showed the way for other leaders to sign the International Code of Honor, which promotes the idea of returning to the observance of tradition and the 7 Noahide laws.
Not content with the annual presidential bending of the knee to the false messiah, Rebbe Schneerson, on his birthday, and illegal recognition of the Noahide laws as if the supreme law of the land in America, which began in 1978 by President Carter at the insistence of Congress and has been followed by every president since, Republicans issued a joint resolution in the House in 1991, which passed and reads as follows. House Joint Resolution 104, 102nd Congress of the United States of America, at the first session begun and held at the City of Washington on Thursday, the 3rd day of January, 1991 Joint Resolution, to designate March 26, 1991, as Education Day, USA. Whereas Congress recognizes the historical tradition of ethical values and principles, which are the basis of civilized society and upon which our great nation was founded. Whereas these ethical values and principles have been the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization, when they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. Whereas without these ethical values and principles, the edifice of civilization stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. Whereas society is profoundly concerned with the recent weakening of these principles that has resulted in crises that beleaguer and threaten the fabric of civilized society. Whereas the justified preoccupation with these crises must not let the citizens of this nation lose sight of their responsibility to transmit these historical ethical values from our distinguished past to the generations of the future. Whereas the Lubavitch movement has fostered and promoted these ethical values and principles throughout the world. Whereas Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, leader of the Lubavitch movement, is universally respected and revered. and his 89th birthday falls on March 26, 1991. Whereas in tribute to this great spiritual leader, the Rabbi, this his 90th year will be seen as one of education and giving, the year in which we turn to education and charity to return the world to the moral and ethical values contained in the 7 Noahide laws. And whereas this will be reflected in an international scroll of honor, signed by the President of the United States and other heads of state, now therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that March the 26th, 1991, the start of the 90th year of Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, leader of the worldwide Lubavitch movement, is designated as Education Day, USA. The President is requested to issue a proclamation calling upon the people of the United States to observe such day with appropriate ceremonies and activities. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Vice President of the United States, and President of the Senate. The Trotskyite Jews Irving Kristol, Daniel Bell, and Norman Podhoretz employed the communist method of entryism to take over the Republican Party in the 1960s and 70s with their fake neoconservative movement and forced the Republican Party to serve the Bolshevik Zionist cause. These Bolshevik Zionist Jews were Straussians, who deliberately lied to the public about their true intentions in order to get their destructive agents elected so that they could then subvert the best interests of the very Republican base whom they had duped into voting for their crypto-communist, anti-American, pro-Soviet candidates. In true Straussian fashion, the crypto-communist libertarians and Marxist Greens helped to elect the Trotskyite Republicans by providing them with spoiler candidates in stark contradiction to their stated principles. The Trotskyites made headway into the Nixon administration and dominated the administrations of Ronnie Reagan, and most especially that of George W. Bush, who bowed to the Jews, Paul Wolfowitz, Elliot Abrams, Richard Pearl, Bernard Lewis, Lulu Schwartz, David Horowitz, Robert Kagan, Douglas Feith, and Richard and Daniel Pipes to bring America into the Middle Eastern wars the Jews had planned out long before the false flag attacks of 9/11. Ronald Reagan bowed to the false Jewish Messiah, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, helped Gorbachev fake the breakup of the Soviet Union so that the communists could infiltrate and subvert the West and gain access to Western capital and technologies, just like they had during Lenin's fake new economic policy. Ronnie granted the largest amnesty to illegal aliens in American history under his Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. Chabad Lubavitch, together with the rest of world Jewry, controlled both Reagan and Gorbachev. They scripted the statements and actions of both puppet leaders to bring about the fake fall of the Soviet Union, so that the communists could then infiltrate the West and capture it at the behest of Jewry. Reagan theatrically ordered his fellow actor, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall, and Chabad Lubavitch handed Gorbachev his script and stage directions, ordering him to pretend that the Soviet Union had collapsed, never to be reconstituted.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
3 weeks after Gorbachev is named the Premier of Russia, Professor Herman Broniver, who some of you may know, who was a very well-known Russian professor, he was paid a very high ransom to get out of Russia, the Rebbe calls him in, he wants to speak to him. And this is what he tells him. He says to him, the gates of Russia are going to come down soon. The Jews of Russia are going to be released. I don't want you to call the media. I want you to call the Jews in Russia, your contacts in Russia. Broniver was a big activist. There was a group of different Jewish organizations, Shamir, Chama, Ezra Achim. These are different Chabad organizations that were doing secret work in Russia. And Broniver was one of the prime activists. I want you to call the Jews in Russia, and I want you to tell them that soon they're going to leave the country and everything's going to change. He's astounded. Gorbachev is prime minister, premier 3 weeks. He gets on the phone. He calls some activists in Moscow, and the guy tells him, listen, there's a KGB car in front of my house right now. My wife was taken in for questioning, and the sense of disbelief is beyond belief. The next day, he writes in a report to the Rebbe that he made a series of calls, And he says nobody believes it, and the Rebbe says the change is underway, but it's just not apparent. We all know what Gorbachev did, that Gorbachev went in the late 80s, early 90s, he changed the policy of the former Soviet Union, and he allowed Jews to leave. In June of 1992, Gorbachev comes to Ben Gurion University in the Negev to get an honorary degree. One of the professors at Ben Gurion University is Herman Braunover. The president of Ben Gurion University asked Herman Braunover, would he please be the personal host and take Gorbachev around his visit to Ben Gurion University in the Negev. He tells him, fine. In the middle of the visit, he says, I have to tell you a story. He tells him in 1985, he tells him in April of 1985, the Rebbe called me in, he told me this whole story, blah, 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 etc., etc. And he tells this to Gorbachev. So Gorbachev turns to him and he says to him, how could he know if I didn't know? A year later, he's in Oxford. Peter Kalms, the father-in-law of Heshi Epstein, who was the president of Shamir, tells Gorbachev the same story about what happened in April of 1985, and Gorbachev tells Peter Kalms, how could he know if I didn't know? The story has been verified from two different historical sources. Interestingly enough, just as a point of information, about 2 years ago, Rabbi Beryl Lazar, the chief rabbi of Russia, and I'm going to talk a little bit what happened in Russia since the fall of communism, had a private meeting with Gorbachev. And when I was in Moscow in September, I wanted to have a meeting with him also, but he was too sick to meet. And Gorbachev told Lazar that the demonstrations, all the people with the Soviet Jewry movement, with the tumult, with the Geschrei, say the big demonstration in Washington was the thing that caused the Jews to come out of Russia. Gorbachev said that the demonstrations had nothing to do with his decision to change the policy of the Soviet Union about the immigration of Jews in Russia.
In 1997, apocalyptic messianic Kabbalistic chaos magician Alexander Dugin set forth a plan to rebuild and expand the Soviet Union in his book Foundations of Geopolitics. Dugin's Soviet revanchism, as he described it in his book, hinged upon Russia annexing Ukraine and subverting the West under the guise of creating a multipolar world, which in fact represents the Soviet conquest of the entire globe to be ruled by the Jewish Messiah in Jerusalem. Dugin has often been called Putin's brain and Chabadnik. Putin followed Dugin's 1997 prescription by attacking Ukraine from 2014 through 2024 and attempting to annex it to Russia. Chabad Lubavitch, Rabbi Beryl Lazar, is known as Putin's rabbi. Putin made Lazar the chief rabbi of Russia in 2000, the first year of the new millennium. Trump is tied to Chabad through his Chabadnik son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his Chabadnik daughter, Ivanka. Trump is attempting to subvert NATO and defeat Ukraine at the behest of Chabad Lubavitch and Chabadnik Putin. Trump also seeks to further empower Chabadnik Benjamin Netanyahu to exterminate the Palestinians and conquer all of Greater Israel. Netanyahu was very close to the false Messiah, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who prophesied that Netanyahu's term as Prime Minister of Israel would be the last, and that Netanyahu would hand over the throne of Israel to the Jewish Messiah.
You are known as Putin's Rasputin, and I've even seen Putin's brain. So he has listened to you in the past.
The base of this affirmation is precisely the correspondence between what Putin does and what I always say.
So in 1997, you wrote a book called Foundations of Geopolitics. And in it, you talked about how Russia should return to being a global superpower. Talk about that. Explain that.
I always believed, and I believe in the future greatness of Russia, because Russia was always and tried to be a superpower.
In his 1997 book, Dugin wrote that for Russia to rebuild its power globally, it would need to use disinformation, destabilization, and annexation. He said one of the targets for Russian annexation should be Ukraine.
You proposed that Russia annex Ukraine. You said that Russia should encourage Britain to leave the EU, Brexit. You suggested that Russia make Iran an ally. Now, it does sound as if Mr. Putin is following your blueprint.
הצלחה בבעיה. אבל ניסה צריך מגיזם. ברכה והצלחה. תפלאי ולתשיר.
The Democrats deliberately sabotaged their own party by needlessly nominating Kamala Harris as their party's nominee when they could have chosen a far better candidate. The Gentile Messiah son of Joseph Habadnik, Donald Trump, is poised to win the presidency and reconstitute the Habad Troika of Netanyahu. Putin and Trump, who are slated to bring about the end of the present world through the Battle of Armageddon and beginning of the Messianic era of the world to come in which no Gentiles will remain. Dangerous times we are living through, for sure, but if we expose what is happening and act to save ourselves, we can prevent them from killing us all off and anointing their Messiah as king over the barren earth they have planned to replace God's creation.